In the early 20th century, there was an unwritten law, a rule more sacred than any commandment carved in stone. Come May 15th, a gentleman could dust off his straw boater hat and signal to the world that summer had arrived. But, and this is a big but, come September 15th, that hat had better be back in its box, replaced by a sensible felt hat. To wear a straw hat a day past the deadline was a grave sin. If a man wore a straw hat, he risked public mockery, and according to tradition, young people would knock these offending hats off and stomp them to oblivion. A bit of harmless fun, you see. This practice became so prevalent that newspapers frequently published warnings as September 15th approached, reminding men to switch to felt hats. In other words, wearing a straw hat past the accepted date was asking for trouble. And in 1922, trouble was exactly what New York City got. Our story begins not on the hallowed 15th of September, but 2 days prior. Perhaps it was the oppressive late summer heat, or maybe just the timeless desire of young men to be absolute menaces. Whatever the reason, a group of youths in the city's Mulberry Bend decided to get a head start on the annual tradition of hat stomping. The first victims were factory workers, likely just trying to get home after a long day. Their straw hats, a practical defense against the sun, were unceremoniously snatched and trampled. Most, probably too tired to argue, let it slide. But then, our ambitious young hooligans made a fatal error in judgment. They targeted a group of dock workers. Now, a dock worker in 1920s New York was not a man to be trifled with. These were men who unloaded ships by hand, men for whom a brawl was a perfectly acceptable way to settle a disagreement. When the teenagers descended upon their straw-hatted heads, the dock workers didn't surrender their headwear. They responded with the kind of righteous fury one might expect. The result was an all-out brawl that spilled onto the Manhattan Bridge, bringing traffic to a standstill. The fashion police had met their match, and the first shots of the Great Straw Hat War had been fired. What started as a localized skirmish quickly metastasized into a city-wide pandemonium. The following evening, gangs of teenagers, emboldened by the previous night's chaos, took to the streets with a terrifying new innovation: sticks with nails driven through the ends. Their purpose was twofold: to more effectively hook a straw hat from a fleeing victim, and one presumes to add a certain emphasis to their sartorial critique. The city descended into a state of fashionable anarchy. Mobs, some reportedly 1,000 strong, roamed Amsterdam Avenue. Men who dared to resist weren't only de-hatted, but also beaten. Several unfortunate souls were hospitalized for the crime of wearing unseasonable headwear. The police, initially slow to respond, soon found themselves caught in the fray, some even having their own hats snatched. The newspapers of the day captured the absurdity with a mixture of shock and morbid amusement. Quote, "Gangs of young hoodlums with spiked sticks terrorize whole blocks," and several hundred straw hats were destroyed, and many black eyes were taken home by combatants. The city's courts were suddenly flooded with a new and peculiar type of criminal: the hat snatcher. In a twist of fate that suggests the universe has a dark sense of humor, one of the magistrates presiding over these cases was a man named Peter A. Hatting. You just can't make this stuff up. For 8 days, the city was in the grip of this bizarre, fashion-fueled fever dream. The violence was real, the injuries were genuine, but the pretext was so utterly ridiculous that it borders on the surreal. It was a war fought by children and young men, not over territory or treasure, but over rigid summer versus autumn hat timetable. The fallout from the Great Straw Hat Riot was as strange as the event itself. Many of the arrested youths, being under 15, were spared jail time. In a move that feels both archaic and strangely practical, the police at one station summoned their parents to administer corporal punishment on the spot. One can only imagine the conversations in those households later that evening. The longest sentence handed down was a mere 3 days in jail. The hat stores, in a stroke of capitalistic genius, stayed open late, doing a brisk trade in felt hats for men too terrified to venture out in their straw boaters. The riot eventually petered out, not because of a decisive police victory, but because the fashion that had sparked it all began to fade. The straw boater, once a symbol of summer, became a relic of a bygone and apparently very violent era. So, the next time you see someone wearing white after Labor Day, or socks with sandals, Take a moment to remember the Great Straw Hat Riot of 1922. It's a reminder that the line between a fashion faux pas and a full-blown street war is thinner than you might think. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking it and subscribing to the channel.